security forces. This is how far they have come. From this point onwards, we will know whether...
The next generation, your children and grandchildren, will do better.
Hardships, sleeping in corridors, and then getting out again.
For nearly a decade, he held the morbid fascination of the entire world. In a single moment of anarchy, he turned back the hands of civilization, bringing pain, anger, agony, and worst of all, terror to anyone who dared to think anything contrary to his very ideal. Osama bin Laden infamously defined the age of terror. Very few details have emerged on how he lived his life in hiding, while a $25 million bounty hovered above his head. The United States says he was a hermit in Abbottabad, Pakistan, but last week two anonymous Pashtuns in an interview with the BBC said they had dinner with bin Laden nearly a year before his death. The mystery behind the events surrounding the Al-Qaeda leader's death have been aided by the code of silence observed by the United States nearly a year after no one has seen any video or pictures other than the President Obama's confirmation and more word of mouth from a number of senior US officials. Last week, all three of his videos were moved to Saudi Arabia, where the media is guaranteed a dead end to any probe. So, is it possible we get back to living life the way we used to know it now that bin Laden is gone? I am Ogaba Oche, and this is Global Perspectives. Associates of bin Laden say he hardly pulled the trigger throughout the 10-year conflict. His claim of disarming a Soviet soldier of his assault Kalashnikov rifle has never been independently verified. But Osama bin Laden was a skilled mobilizer of men. His recruitment program dragged in youths from the Middle East and North Africa, all eager to liberate Islamist Afghanistan from Soviet control. His search for power and influence drew him into the palaces and luxury of the Arab world's ruling class, courting favor and millions of dollars in support of the jihad. It has been argued if the Mujahideen actually ensured the Soviets' exit from Afghanistan in the late 1980s, or the pressure of a declining Soviet Union empire. But Osama bin Laden was an egoist and lapped onto immense popularity in the Arab world. A poll in the aftermath of the Soviet-Afghan War ranked him among three of the most influential persons in the Arab world. It was the Gulf War in 1990 that could have launched bin Laden from the pages of a folk hero into the hyped-up messianic image he portrayed of himself. Instead, it marked bin Laden's decline into the abyss. His request to defend the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia against Iraq's Saddam Hussein was shunned by the Arab world, preferring the US-led Allied forces. But Osama craved power and control. While he tended to his family business, he hatched a plot to punish Saudi Arabia. The 1995 Kobar Towers bombing in Saudi Arabia marked the end of frosty relations between bin Laden and his host nation. Already declared wanted by Saudi Arabia, the bombing ensured the revocation of his citizenship. But Osama was already a household terror reference before this time. In 1993, Osama bin Laden met a certain Mohammed Farah Aidid, even though Farah Aidid later said this meeting never took place. That meeting formed the basis of support between Farah Aidid's Islamist faction in Somalia and bin Laden's Al-Qaeda. Months later, a number of Al-Qaeda trainees moved over to Mogadishu, the Somali capital. The killing of 18 American special forces in April 1993, infamously referred to Black Hawk Down, marked a turning point in the Somali conflict. The Americans left Mogadishu but never forgot. Expelled from Saudi Arabia, Sudan proved a reliable base for the Al-Qaeda leader to grow his infrastructure and network. The Arab League realized how dangerous bin Laden had become, but then collective will was lacking in detaining him. Besides, deep splits in opinion had slowed the regional body from arriving at a consensus, just like the Gulf War, where it was divided. The United States and the UN were brought into this picture, but however, in 1995, there was no turning back when the Egyptian leader survived an assassination attempt. President Mubarak at that time blamed it on Al-Qaeda. While the world debated on whether he be sent to Saudi Arabia to face trial over terrorism sponsorship, Saudi Arabia rejected the proposal, fearing that Al-Qaeda's leader's presence in Saudi Arabia could lead to a revolution. And so when he returned to Afghanistan, it was to familiar grounds, but he had a score to settle with his homeland. The Koba towers were strategic. Hundreds of American military personnel were resident in Koba. On July 26th, a truck bomb detonated in Koba towers, killing tens of people. America blamed the Hezbollah based in Iran, but in time the US will realize that Al-Qaeda was behind a terror contraption being planned for the future, Hezbollah International. But Saudi Arabia was spot on naming bin Laden as the prime suspect. In Afghanistan, the terror kingpin found a haven. Together with the Taliban leader and head of government Mullah Omar Mohammed, they applied the strict rule of Sharia throughout the country. Public executions became the order of the day, while Al-Qaeda set up training camps here and there and helped themselves to huge profits escaped from the Afghan opium market. It was in Afghanistan that bin Laden began to perfect plans for a strike on the United States, but he began with smaller strikes. First, the syndicated attacks on US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998. In both attacks, nearly 500 people were killed. Al-Qaeda did not claim responsibility for those attacks, but investigations eventually pointed the dastardly bombings towards Al-Qaeda. The Bojinka plot was only known to the top hierarchy of Al-Qaeda. In fact, at some point, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed controlled all aspects of this plan. Blowing up airlines had always been a fancy of Al-Qaeda. The only conflict was location and timing. While bin Laden disagreed with bombing the Empire State Building, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed wanted more targets. In the end, they settled for the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and the White House. On September 11, 2001, Operation Bojinka was executed, the worst terror attacks on American soil after the Pearl Harbor in 1943. 4 groups of hijackers took over 4 planes, crashing into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, Pentagon, and a last plane destined for the White House was put down by revolting passengers. At the end, nearly 3,000 people died from this incident, leaving several families distraught. The US was left in deep mourning. Within hours of the attacks, the FBI released the names and in many cases the personal details of the suspected pilots and hijackers. By midday, the US and German intelligence agencies had intercepted communications pointing to Osama bin Laden. 15 of the men were from Saudi Arabia, 2 from the United Arab Emirates, 1 from Egypt, and then 1 from Lebanon. Misri had come home, and President George W. Bush was emphatic in his response.
I want you all to know that America today is on bended knee in prayer for the people whose lives were lost here, for the workers who work here, for the families who mourn. This nation stands with the good people of New York City and New Jersey and Connecticut as we mourn the loss of thousands of our citizens. I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Yet the United States public enemy number 1 remained in hiding. Towards the end of President Bush's tenure, the search fizzled out for bin Laden. The United States will confess that the closest it got to capturing bin Laden was when it stormed Tora Bora in December 2001. Then it only succeeded in destroying the Al-Qaeda leader's base. But then the US curbed Al-Qaeda and then the Taliban in no small measure, capturing Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks in 2005, and several more Al-Qaeda senior operatives, notably Fazullah Abdul Muhammad, the mastermind behind the US embassy bombings in Tanzania and Kenya in 1998. When you draw a comparison between US Presidents Barack Obama and George Bush, several analysts will argue that President Bush began the war on terror, and then President Obama gave it some direction. President Obama had his sights early on, digging out bin Laden from hiding. Audio messages here and there meant bin Laden was still alive. Intelligence reports as late as 2010 indicated that, contrary to widespread opinion, bin Laden was still actively involved in the terror network's organization. It is remarkable that it was not years of drone attacks, arrests, and controversial torture techniques in the Bush era that led to the capture and killing of bin Laden. Rather, it was some stroke of luck and old-fashioned spy-gathering technique that led the US Navy SEALs to Abbottabad, Pakistan. A night before the US Navy SEALs took out bin Laden, Americans had watched their commander-in-chief try out stand-up comedy, doing a fairly good job.
Is prouder to put this birth certificate matter to rest than the Donald. And that's because he can finally get back to focusing on the issues that matter. Like, did we fake the moon landing? What really happened in Roswell? And where are Biggie and Tupac?
But hours later, President Obama broke the news that will perhaps define his finest moment, and definitely one Americans would never forget.
And finally, last week, I determined that we had enough intelligence to take action and authorized an operation to get Osama bin Laden and bring him to justice. Today, at my direction, the United States launched a targeted operation against that compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. A small team of Americans carried out the operation with extraordinary courage and capability. No Americans were harmed. They took care to avoid civilian casualties. After a firefight, they killed Osama bin Laden and took custody of his body.
A week later, President Obama was at Ground Zero in New York. Vengeance had been paid.
Philosophy that Osama bin Laden represented, the Al-Qaeda philosophy, is still very much with us. I don't think we should take our feet off the pedal, as it were. You find acts of terrorism virtually all over the world. It hasn't relented. Although monumental terrorism, like we saw in the case of the World Trade Center buildings, no more happen. But then there are parts of the world, such as West Africa, Nigeria here, the Sahara, various parts of the Sahara, Horn of Africa, Afghanistan, Pakistan, we still find acts of terrorism. So the fight against terrorism mustn't relent.
The only physical evidence we have that Osama bin Laden is dead was an announcement by the US President Barack Obama. There's been no photo, no video evidence. In fact, recently a US court paid to the future occurrence that it will happen that any video document or video photo will emerge. Osama bin Laden's death. Do you think the America was tactful in this, handling this whole thing?
Oh yes, they didn't want a situation whereby his body will be available to followers, or followers will bury his body somewhere and the place will become a sort of mecca, a sort of shrine where people will go pay homage to and still draw inspiration from him even though he's dead. They wanted to put that aside. Although there's still inspiration, then his physical presence, even in the form of a dead body, is no more. So I think the fight still it still continues at that level of the spiritual, the philosophical, the inspirational, as it were. So I think the United States did a very, very tactful thing by dumping his body in the sea.
Recently, it has just come public for the first time. Documents which were seized from the Bin Laden compound in Ogaba in Pakistan have gone and been published online for the first time. If you go through some of those documents, what is underlying in there is that Bin Laden, for the first time, did come as some sort of surprise when he said that he was concerned more with groups claiming allegiance to Al-Qaeda, not following the Al-Qaeda ideology. For example, Muslims were being targeted in attacks being carried out by Islamist fundamentalist groups, and the United States, for example, wasn't being targeted. Does this look like someone who was going out of control of the organization he began?
Well, not necessarily. For one thing, we have to take cognizance of the fact that the Western countries really tightened their security. The United States, for one, and Western Europe. A lot of the countries tightened their security. Secondly, where acts of terrorism are taking place, we have to take cognizance also of the local context, because their acts are defined by the local situation itself. You know, there may be situations in which they are fighting against a particular government and they can't avoid but to target Muslims as well. So such situations exist, and it doesn't mean that they've abandoned Al-Qaeda or anything like that. Still, they're committing terrorist acts of terror.
This man initiated the age of terror. He began an ideology which was founded on terror, wickedness and hatred. A lot of people look back at this Al-Qaeda age, what it did to the world. But you also find that there are pockets of groups here and there who claim to be followers of what this man has done. Do you think that in any way, why this has continued over the number of years? Why do you have people who tend to love what Al-Qaeda has become?
Well, terrorism fundamentally is a weapon of the weak against the strong. Terrorists really do not represent strength. It's a last resort that they use their bodies as, suicide, human explosives, so to speak. And it's something the ordinary man can easily identify. You know, here are weak people fighting on our behalf. So acts of terror will persist. Just as they were there long before Osama bin Laden came on the scene, will persist. And I think that explains why groups still employ terrorism in their fight, in their struggles against governments and other what they perceive to be opposition groups. But so long as we have conflicts on earth, and I don't think conflicts are things that can easily go away or go away at all, so long as we have them, we will have people and individuals and groups who will utilize acts of terror in persecuting their conflicts.
It is some sort of when you realize that Al-Qaeda, for example, was pursuing a way in which things could change, especially in the Arab world, how governance happened for them. And then the Arab Spring did happen. Al-Qaeda, for example, will say this is what we were trying to achieve. But look at the Arab Spring has become and the way it has been viewed worldwide. A lot of people say that the Arab Spring has been devoid of Islamist influence, for example. Do you think there are any dangers, any fears that at some point in time this popular uprising going on in the Middle East will be hijacked by groups like Al-Qaeda?
Well, a lot of people express that fear. But fundamentally, the Arab Spring were more or less mass uprisings by the people. not groups here and there, by the people against leadership they were tired of. Leadership, dictatorships, oppressive forms of leadership. We had the case of Libya under Gaddafi, the case of Egypt, and that kind of thing. So it's not something that I don't think any terror group can hijack. But the fear is there. A lot depends on the political order that is imposed after the Arab Spring. The nature of political order that comes into being, whether it is democratic, whether it is all-inclusive, to bring in all the groups involved in the political process, etc. That will define for us whether the political system after the Arab Spring being hijacked by specific groups or is, all-inclusive. I don't think, personally, I don't see in the future it being hijacked by specific groups at all.
Al-Qaeda began fighting the insurgency, especially in the Soviet Union, as they fought with Afghanistan, and then gradually it became this umbrella group, Hezbollah International, one umbrella body, several Islamist groups with similar interests trying to align with this common cause and goal. Many years later, we have so many groups. Do you think that Al-Qaeda, for example, still controls this umbrella group of Islamist terror organizations?
I don't know. I don't think so. Let me say I don't know. I don't think so. Because terrorism itself is founded on inspiration and belief, identification, not necessarily any form of control. We have groups that identify with Al-Qaeda, identify with their methods, and try to replicate it. As such, we would say they are affiliated to Al-Qaeda. Not that Al-Qaeda controls them or anything like that. And besides, the cell of Al-Qaeda that's remaining are quite small. Al-Qaeda fundamentally, I think, has broken up into fragments across the world. But the cells that we see that are active are quite small here and there.
Finally, we sit back, we watch, we'll write back what has happened in this period in time of our history. We'll look back at the Al-Qaeda years, the post-Bin Laden years, what it meant for this generation, and afterwards. What would you say are the most defining moments of the Al-Qaeda Osama bin Laden years?
Definitely the attack on the World Trade Center in New York City. I mean, that was an iconic moment. The US defines that as the most significant attack on American soil after Pearl Harbor. In fact, I don't think there has been any attack on American soil after Pearl Harbor. And the magnitude, the scale of deaths and injured, it made it really historically very, very significant as far as international conflicts and warfare go.
On my way out. Yes, a dramatic Sunday it was in Europe, from Athens to Paris. The common denominator was revenge, punishment for the ruling parties by their subjects over poor economic fortunes. It is ouvre la porte for French President Nicolas Sarkozy, who failed to make a famous comeback. His last-minute rallying cry wasn't enough, so he becomes the second French leader not to win a second term since the start of the Fifth Republic in the 1950s. The spotlight is on Francois Hollande. Is coming to the Palais de l'Élysée 14 years after fellow socialist François Mitterrand. His promise of 150,000 jobs for teachers, lowering the retirement age from 62 to 60, must be fulfilled quickly for an impatient French electorate. Punishment in Greece was more brutal with grave consequences. A coalition which ensured the signing of a Euro-IMF salvage deal has been roundly beaten, and a common rallying cry among the new guys on the block is a revision of the Euro-IMF austerity package. Such is the political chaos in Athens that the new Nazi party could even get a place on the planned coalition. Europe indeed quavers at the prospect of another Greek bailout crisis. And in Moscow, he is back at the Kremlin. Never mind his short period of absence, Emperor Vladimir Putin has begun a reign which should guarantee his place in Russia's history as the longest-serving leader, topping communist leader Joseph Stalin. And yep, and protesters need to know this, rights activists. Need I remind you the former KGB agent also has a black belt in judo. He takes no prisoners. Osai Komi Waza. So it's final whistle blown, curtains drawn, lights out, and the time is up. I am Ogaba Oche. Thank you for watching Global Perspectives. See you next time.
And the security forces, this is how far they have come. From this point onwards, we will know whether
The next generation, your children and grandchildren, will do better.
Hard shifts, sleeping in corridors, and then going out again.